Hear ye, hear ye. Dewayne Hendircks, TAPR DCC. All right, if we're lucky, we can get through this in a half hour. This is the unfun stuff, part of this stuff. It's not technical, it's rules, it's the government, Big Brother, whatever. And however, it's my lot in life to have to deal with these issues. So, and actually, it can be fun sometimes. What we're going to do here, I've sort of given this talk for the last this is the third year in terms of going over the regulatory stuff. So some of you may have heard some of this before, so please bear with me. And again, some of you probably haven't. So I want to go over the path of SF regulation in the United States, talk about some of the current regulatory activities, because actually there's been a lot of action since I did this last year, and talk about some future things that need to be done on the regulatory front. So the FCC started getting interested in spread spectrum in 1981 when they issued a notice of inquiry, which was the first toe in the water for them on this issue. I guess a lot of stuff got declassified back in '79. I was just talking to somebody the other day who had filed a patent in '52 and it went and embargoed and didn't pop out until '79. So, like, from what I've seen in the literature, basically things started popping after that. And then there's some people that went to work for the commission from the private sector that wanted to really do something different, and then they essentially forced this NOI out the door in '81. And I think what I'm going to do next year, or at least I'm going to try to put this NOI up on the TAPR website, to add to our SF historical page, because it is really an interesting piece of work in terms of what it proposed. You know, it's like, hey, we think spread spectrum is the best thing in the world. It will solve all the world's problems. Certainly the Commission's problems in terms of treating spectrum like property and not being able to refarm it because it's like, you know, Ben Cartwright and his boys, you know, really walk onto the pond of Rosa and will shoot anybody who comes on their land. So they threw this out, and actually, in terms of what happened in public, there wasn't a lot of comment about it. If you look at the docket and see what comments were filed, there wasn't a lot of stuff filed on this, but behind the scenes, there was a lot of activity. So what it did kick up is that some of these people at the Commission talked to people at ARRL, Paul Rinaldo and others, and a lot of things started happening in terms of doing spread spectrum. I mean, ARRL took this thing to heart and said, hey, this is neat, let's go out and see what we can do with it. Okay, let's take it for a walk. I won't cover any of that stuff because it's been documented in the ARRL source book, and we would like to certainly see them continue to sell more of those source books at $12 a pop. So basically nothing happened on the FCC front until '84 when notice for full rulemaking came out both for the amateur service and for unlicensed. In the spread spectrum source book, you will see all the documents on the FCC side, okay, for the amateur radio service. And what is, of course, harder to get a hold of is what happened on the unlicensed side. I have all the filings and stuff from back then in terms of what was put on the record in the actual NPRM. And I think I'll put that up on the site too. Again, you can't get these things in machine-readable form, so you really got to just, you know, do it the hard way. But if you look at the amateur radio NPRM, it's very restrictive in terms of what was proposed. And if you look at the Part 15 NPRM, it's like wide open in comparison, relatively. Okay. However, if you look at that 84 NPRM and go back to the notice of inquiry in 81, it was like, well, what happened? You know, I mean, it's like they were proposing to use spread spectrum from like 70 megahertz up to light, and with no power limits. Okay. And now all of a sudden they had, you know, clipped that down a bit in terms of where you could use it, and also the power is, I think, down to like 100 watts, either 70 or 100. Okay. And but you know, it was still okay. I mean, it was, you know, it was different. Then a year passed, and we get to the report and order phase, and then in '85, report and orders came out on both dockets. And we got 97.311 as we know it today. Okay. And if you look at the discussion in the report and order, it's very interesting. It's like a lot of the stuff that we hear today, noise floor, interference, da-da-da-da, was all treated. I mean, that report and order, if you look at the NP, well, I'm sort of getting ahead of myself. But if you look at that, read that report and order and the NPRM from the previous year, there was a lot of thought in the commission that went into writing it. It took a long time to write, and it was really well done, and it really was a very good treatment of the issues and the comments that were filed on that docket. So, again, we got 97.311 as we know it, and on the Part 15 side, we got what we know today. Of course, it's been changed more so than the amateur rules. But Part 15 was cut down to 1 watt and 3 bands. Okay. So, again, there was a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff where this initial brand concept from 81 was whittled down to some pale shadow of itself, where when the idea was spread spectrum taking over the world, well, now it was just sort of taking over a corner in eastern Kuwait. So the 85 rules that we all know and love, SS above 2420, I won't even, I mean, we all know what these are, okay? And again, just ask the question, why were we treated so shabbily when Part 15 wasn't? Well, and because all these things moved along at the same time. Now, I have actually gone and interviewed people at the commission, you know, because I'm in the process of writing a monograph on this. Unfortunately, a lot of the stuff I've been told is off the record. And so, unfortunately, I cannot tell you this stuff. But all I will say is that it is a very fascinating tale of power brokering behind the scenes. Okay? Fear, control, lots of things. Okay? And actually, for instance, there was a lot more stuff that was done under the AMRAD umbrella that was actually documented. In fact, the, you know, head shaking here. Okay? So there was the suppression of things. Okay? So maybe one day all of this will come out. Okay? So I'm essentially sitting on this monograph where I have these interviews of like people like Mike Marcus and others, and I can't do anything with it. Okay? So all I can do is take what was put on the public record, and I'll put that on the website eventually, but I can't put the detailed story about how we got to where we got, because you see it's important, because when I go to the commission now and I talk to them, you see, they're basically lawyers there. And lawyers, of course, like to work with precedent. Okay? So you say, well, why don't you go back and look at that NOI in 81? And they give you this blank stare, and it's like, you mean I have to work? You know, I have to go back and find this thing? You know, and they say, oh, no, you know, here it is. Okay? And then, you know, you get them to read it, and they say, this was from the commission? Okay, I mean, wow. So, and then you walk them through the regulatory history on paper and how things change, okay? And I found that when you go into the commission, it's like what they're used to is people coming in and saying, I want this, give me this, okay? And they got this little, you know, you can get a meeting with anybody at the commission pretty much for a half hour just by making an appointment. So they sit there and they got the, you know, the chronometer running, you know, and you rabble on and rant and whatever, and they say, thank you very much, thank you for coming in, and adios, okay? Okay, and what I do when I go in is I basically play history lesson, you know, and just do this grand sweep, you know, you can see the horses charging off in the distance, and, you know, the drum roll and whatever, you know, cinemascope, Technicolor, and you see the hook planet, and these people get engaged, you know, and like the time passes and the 30 minutes are over, and they're still sitting there on the edge of their chair, okay? And that's how you influence people at the FCC, okay? I remember one talk I gave to a staffer, I did just that, and I heard about this from other people for weeks, because this guy just went around and told everybody about this great talk, you know, that just talked about the history of spread spectrum from day one. Okay. Now, I'm saying this because there's a method to my madness in telling you all this, because, you see, I want you guys to become part of the process. You see, I don't want to be the one that does all this. I want you to help. Okay. So to do that, you need to know how things work. So the Part 15 rules, you guys know and love these too. You know, we didn't get hybrid, they did. We got more power. They got unlimited spreading codes. So The commercial sector was actually able to go out and build real products. So from the 85 period, what you see is amateur radio, like the AMRAP people got burnt out and just went off and, did something else. And the commercial sector, a few companies came out, sort of stubbed their toes, But here we are today where we have millions of these devices out in the field. About 95% of the devices in the market are LAN-oriented products, locally or networked, and about 5% are MAN products. Okay. Now, to be perfectly frank, after all the skullduggery behind the scenes, the commission was basically convinced that, by putting this service in the garbage band, it's commonly known as the garbage band, because this is where the industrial, scientific, and medical stuff was, like kiln dry, with machines and stuff. These services were put there for good reason, in that it's hard to imagine a kiln drying machine going to Congress and raising hell. Okay, with a Congress critter. Right? So, but if you put it anywhere else, like on top of TV channels, then the NAV would be there, real fast. Okay, so that was the rationale. And by cutting the power down, you couldn't go anywhere with it, So, but what happened was that, as things happen in Washington, when people make decisions who don't know about technical issues, the manufacturers are able to do things with these devices that, for instance, Siley was one of the first ones that said, hey, well, we can go a long distance with these devices. I mean, what we have called QRP operations. Okay, so 20 miles, 30 miles. Siley was getting 60 miles with their products. So suddenly the commission had a problem. And then we had a company called Metricon. Okay, so you had a guy named Paul Barron, who's known in some circles as the grandfather of the Internet. Well, Vince Cerf is the father of the Internet. Paul invented packet switching. And he's also a ham. And he formed this Metricon company, which was to use unlicensed spectrum to provide a service to read meters, okay, over large metropolitan areas. Okay, so this came out of the blue, and later on they changed the idea to essentially deliver the Internet when that sort of became important, and the service is what you see today. But at first it was for utility meter reading, and now you had this service essentially breaking out of its what was supposed to be a self-imposed barrier and doing all sorts of different things. And I can tell you that today, at the Commission, there are still people who are convinced that Part 15 is just about LANs and devices that don't go very far. And when you come in and tell them that you got these products on the market that will go 60 miles, they're totally amazed. Because again, they're lawyers, okay? And if you look at the time between 85 and now, there are fewer people in proportion, there are technical people in the Commission, okay? So, in fact, Reed Hunt basically tried to dismantle Office of Engineering and Technology, okay? Basically, he said, well, this is downsized, we'll move some key people to other bureaus, and that will be that. We don't need a Office of Engineering and Technology and a chief engineer position. Okay? It's pretty sad. I mean, and then one could say, hey, well, look at us. We're the Aerometro Radio Service. We're an experimental service, so who are we supposed to talk to in the Commission? I mean, who's going to address our needs? So, we have these two categories of Part 15 devices, LAN and MAN. And if you look at the amateur radio situation, there's nothing available. Where can you buy a Part 97 amateur radio spectrum device? Okay? So we've essentially been relegated to, again, a lot of us have taken Part 15 devices and used them, and some of us have souped them up, okay, and some of us haven't, just they work. Now, if you look at it's closely at Part 15, what's happened since 85 is the Commission has changed the rules several times. They were changed in 89, okay, essentially, well, 90. They were changed in 1990, okay? And what happened, and then they were changed again just this year, okay? In fact, the change in 1990, there was sort of a grandfather clause, and so that in 94, in June of 94, this restriction came into effect where you had to have a special antenna connector on all Part 15 devices. Okay. So basically, Silink and other companies that were doing the MAN products were upset by this because it really cut into their business. So what they did is they approached the commission and asked for a waiver with the notion that, hey, if we have a professional installer, you know, install our products, then we don't have to have this special connector on it. Okay? So this has allowed them to have the same box that they could ship in the United States and also ship overseas. Now, essentially, 90% of Silink's revenue for radios comes from overseas today. Their market in the U.S. is just basically non-existent. They've given up on it. Now, so that came into effect in June of 94. Now, there's a rulemaking that just came into effect in February, I believe, whereby now you have to type certify a Part 15 product, antenna, feed line, and all. Okay? So if you want a 50-foot cable and a 8 dBi gain antenna, that's one option that you have to go through and the whole, So, I mean, look at what it's doing here. You basically have this envelope that's closing. Because what they're trying to do without saying this is that we want to restrict the range of these devices. Okay? So you have this 4-watt EIRP thing, okay? And so like, again, people like Silink have shown that with 4-watt EIRP, under the right circumstances with the proper engineering, you can go a long way. Okay? So they can't change the rules of physics, you see, so they just make it harder for the rank and file person to buy these devices, deploy them, and essentially bypass the telco. And the situation which they've gotten themselves to with the auction coming out of the Telecom Act of 96, where the situation is basically this. They go out and get billions of dollars for the spectrum for these people to offer advanced services, but yet and still, Joe Public can go out and buy these devices and bypass those services and use free spectrum. Okay? So, of course, again, behind the scenes, those people, those companies have lobbied the commission to say, look, you got to do something about this. I mean, you're devaluing our spectrum. Okay? Now, with all this stuff going on, I mean, we're sitting there, we have ties to the spectrum too, and so we've been blocked. We were blocked in '85, see? So we're not even on the chessboard. Okay? So those Part 15 devices, it's like now we're the only ones that can take them and do anything with them because we can buy them and operate them under 97. But wait a minute. You see, now this device doesn't conform to 97.311. So, what do I do? Okay. All right. So the first step to deal with this conundrum was Bob Buas, K6KGS, wanted to start some spread spectrum experimentation. Essentially, there was an effort back in 91 that started. Apple was pushing for. Apple had in mind a Newton device, and so they wanted a new class of unlicensed service for these devices. And that became known later on as data PCS. And so Apple started lobbying the commission, and other companies like Sun Microsystems, Tandem, HP, and others they formed an industry coalition. And Bob Buas was consulting for Sun, and he was doing a lot of, Sun was spending a lot of money on spread spectrum design and testing stuff out because basically they wanted to use wireless to fulfill their mission of have a campus and being able to have people roam around with Sun workstations and have high speed access to a LAN. But what happened was that, well, I won't get into what happened with Sun, but Bob, as a result of that emphasis, because he was that got him interested in spread spectrum, decided he wanted to do something under Part 97. So with the help of the league, okay, he filed an STA request. And it took a year. Essentially, it was filed in 91, and it took a whole year to get through the system and be issued in 92. So basically what he asked for was that most of 97.311 be waived. And it was, but what he forgot to do was to waive the ID requirement. Okay. And this FTA has been renewed, and it's currently in effect right now. It's been renewed every year in a one-year term. And the last time it was renewed, they basically said, hey, look, just here it is. It's perpetual. Go away, experiment, have fun, be happy. Okay. But the net effect of it on the regulatory, this issue of spread spectrum in the amateur radio service has been nil, because basically Bob antagonized a lot of people in certain quarters of our service, repeater people, weak signal, essentially, putting up a red flag, and the bulls just came right on in. So what became necessary was for TAPR to get involved. But before that happened, Phil and I are on the League's Future Systems Committee, and we started, about the time of the Blue Lock SCA going in the hopper, we started talking about this in the Future Systems Committee about changing the rules, the spread spectrum rules. So about that time, 92, we started pushing there to get the league to file a change of rules. And I think the way it went is that we sent it up to the board level. The board actually voted to do it, and then nothing happened, And then the next year, the board, it came up again, and they voted to do it, and then they formed a ad hoc spread spectrum committee. Okay, and then that was more time delay, and so. After delay upon delay upon delay and recasting what was going to be the league's position on this several times, something was finally filed in December of 95. And I won't go over that in detail because we've all been through this thing. Essentially the commission took it and put it out for comment, in March of this year. So after the league petition went in, we decided to get involved, and the notion was that a credible national amateur radio organization would conduct a series of experiments to try to gain some information about what this is all about and what the problems were going to be. So we filed early, about the time the league's petition went in, and essentially our petition was blocked, because the league sent a letter to the FCC asking them not to act on their FTA, because we were essentially asking for spread spectrum below 70 centimeters. Okay, and the league had adopted a policy of not going with spread spectrum below 70 centimeters. So now I don't want to cast aspersions at the league here, because essentially what the staff people were doing was following the dictates of the board. Okay. Now, how the board got to that decision? Well, it's a political thing. You understand? You guys know what was going on, And a lot of our constituency wasn't even aware that spread spectrum was allowed at 70 centimeters, and so the sentiment was like, "What? No, it's 70 centimeters? Well, get them out of there." 900 megahertz, or 28 millimeters, or whatever. Okay. So. A lot of hue and cry comes up whenever we try to do something different in the service. Anyway, that got worked out, and that's an interesting story there, which will remain behind the scenes. And in November of last year, our FTA was issued. So essentially, it has the same waivers as the Blue Lock FTA, except we took care of the ID requirement. Yes. No. No. It's on the TAPR website. 6 meters. 50 megahertz. Yeah, actually, there's somebody that got a waiver from a local FCC office and is doing some HF experiments. But that gets into a whole different story about how the rules work, and that waivers are different than SPAs, okay? And you can get waivers if you know how to work the system. I mean, the real rule is that there are no rules at the commission. It's basically how you play the system, and, you know, you get what you want sometimes. I mean, even the league doesn't get what they want all the time. So basically, we have a 6-month term in that, remember I said the Bluehans SPA had an unlimited term? Well, that's illegal. I mean, even under the commission's own rules, SPAs can only be issued for a term of 6 months. Okay? And we asked them about that. I took our attorney in and said, well, you know, in part 2 it says da-da-da-da-da. And they said, yeah, right. You know. So, okay, what are you going to do? I mean, it was just like, look, our rationale was that we just got tired of, because, see, there's this interagency committee called IRAC, okay, Interagency Radio Advisory Committee. And, see, we operate in shared spectrum, so anytime there's a change in the spectrum that's shared by all these other agencies, they have to go pass on it, okay? So the FCC can't just willy-nilly say, oh, okay, here's your SPA. So when things go to IRAC, it's like it goes into this black hole, and it comes out months later, if you're lucky. So you've got to have somebody at the FCC working this thing to move it through IRAC, okay? So IRAC is truly a secret cabal, okay? And so with Bob's thing, it's like every year he had to renew this, and he'd send it in and have to go to IRAC, and he'd say, well, wait a minute, like, why it was okay last year, why do we have to do this again this year? Okay, well, that's just the way it is, because things could have changed somehow in one of these agencies and how they were using the spectrum, and they may not like it. So that was going on, so the commission just got tired of shepherding this thing through, and that's why they did it. And it's a very pragmatic reason, you can understand it. Okay. So in our STA, we have a 6-month term, and we also have to file a report with the commission, and we also have to make that report available to the public. Now, what the FCC is doing these days is that when they're saying things have to be made available to the public, they're saying put them up on the World Wide Web. Okay. Significant change. Whatever we want. No, it's basically, we said we're going to do some stuff and experiment, and it's our duty to file some kind of report. So, yes. What you have to, Greg? Okay. Remember, the commission's an independent agency, but then their actions are subject to the whims of the judicial system. Okay. So you put things on the record so that later on, if there's some problem, what the court will do is go back and look at the record. Okay. So finally, the commission issued an NPRM in March of '97, and basically took the same rules that the league proposed and put them out as the proposed rule changes. However, if you read that NPRM closely, you'll see that there was some influence from the commercial sector. The Part 15 people came in and lobbied the commission and said, boy, if you do this, we're just going to be dead, and you know, we've got these millions of devices out in the world, and baby monitors won't work anymore, and you know, whatever. Life wins, and property will be impaired. So this had an effect, and so basically, if you look at that, other than stating the rules that were in the elite petition, there's all this verbiage about Part 15, okay, and how automatic power control is a way to solve this problem. Okay, so it's like, hey gang, we're proposing automatic power control, we think it's great, and we want to hear from you about how it's going to help the Part 15 people. So then the comments and reply to comments were filed, and basically everybody pretty much was against automatic power control, even the Part 15 people. Okay, so what they wanted was basically for us not to be able to use spread spectrum at all on the ISM band, or if we we're allowed to use spread spectrum, we can only do a watt. So they basically wanted us, licensed service, to be limited to the same constraints that they were. Okay? Which is very interesting. Now, and that would be okay. Now, if you look at this logically, it's like, remember, we can do more than spectrum in those bands. I mean, we can do TV, we can do... Yeah, okay. So they weren't asking that all of that stuff be stopped. Because obviously they really couldn't do that on this petition because, I mean, under this NPR, because all it was about was spread spectrum. But again, you opened the door a little bit, and so they want to make their points for the record. If you look at the filings that were made in the reply comment cycle, they fall into three categories. Okay, spread spectrum is great. Let's get on with it. So that's like us, the ARRL, and the National Communications System, which is a sort of a consortium of some of the three-letter agencies and whatever. Okay. Well, I'll just say this is like AKA the Defense Department. Then we have a proven concept, but with protections for the incumbents. Okay, our fellow colleagues, you know. And you got AMSAT, Central States VHF Society, and the 220 Spectrum Management Association. And then we have the commercial interests: Metrocom, Symbol Technology, Cellnet. Okay. So we're awaiting FCC final action on this thing, and the latest G2 from both the League's attorneys and our attorneys is that do not hold your breath. Okay. With the changes at the commission, new commissioners, new staffers, whatever, this is not a high priority thing, and especially because of all the controversy. So the way I read it is that I think we can work out any differences on the automatic power control that we may have with the League or AMSAT. And I would say that if the League, AMSAT, and TAPR came into the commission and we were all linked in arm in arm and singing songs together about, you know, how there's no problem, you know, we're all happy. APC is going to be a major issue because, yes? Well, if you read it, if you read the proposed regulation, it's only for 1 watt and above, and there's a certain figure of merit which is used to determine how it's supposed to work. Okay, but that's it. There is no level of specificity more than what's there. Okay, I mean, the attempt was to try to strike a balance between being too restrictive and being, you know, just saying enough to do what we wanted to accomplish. Well, yes. Yeah, well, that's right. So what happened was that there was a reversal of thinking on this whole thing once we had a chance in the light of day to look at it, and we basically decided that it was a bad idea. Well, in terms of being codified in stone in the rules, okay, and that the minimal power rule was necessary and sufficient for this. But as Phil talked earlier today, you know, power control is a good thing for spread spectrum, you know, in certain circumstances. Okay, so even Phil, you know, in his comments that he filed, admitted that he changed his thinking on this.
I'll tell you exactly what happened. I was the originator of the language in the current ARRL decision. Require automatic power control above 1 watt and a limit on receiver head notes. Okay, because my experience in making stuff work is a real sequence system. I realized how important it is. And I put this out not because I really thought it ought to be codified in the rules, because the only way to realize time would have to be anybody or something like it. But basically, it's a bonus for us to be signal type. Okay? And quite frankly, the response was we got shit on. Okay? And I said, okay, fine. This is the way you want it. I will reverse my stance with the commission and say, I will make sure you're firing on it. This is not saying at all about what action will go radio. Okay? But I felt like the big signal crowd on the other side here who seems to be adamantly opposed to spread spectrum at all costs was not playing fair here, so I decided to withdraw my bomb.
So, where we stand is that I think we can resolve our differences within the amateur community among the three major organizations. The CWID thing, I don't think that's going to be a problem. We'll get that resolved. But basically it comes down to APC. Okay? And even though the Part 15 people were filed against it, politically right now, I think that the Commission will see that as offering a compromise. And that, to be pure and simple, again, what the Part 15 people want to do is just get us off the ban altogether. Okay, the Commission is not going to do that. So they feel that the compromise that they want to offer is to force us to use APC over one. Okay? And so we're in the midst of trying to figure out how to deal with this. Yes? No. There are some more fundamental issues here. It's like, why can an unlicensed service dictate to a licensed service? If you look at the league's comments on this, okay, because these comments by Metrocom and others, they were ex parte. Some of these things came in after the reply comment cycle, okay? And the league basically, they did their job. I mean, you got to give them credit. They went in there and said, look, they filed ex parte comments responding to this and saying, this is rubbish. I mean, so we have to band together as a licensed service and say, look, your rules say that, you know, unlicensed they look at every Part 15 device and it says you have to tolerate interference, okay? So you coming in and telling us that the hospital is going to stop working because, you know, the amateurs are interfering with your devices that are installed in lands and hospitals, that doesn't cut it. Yeah. Okay. So it's not fair, but it's the reality of the situation. So that is what we are fighting for. Okay. And I think that if you look at all the stuff that's going to be coming down about encroachment on our spectrum, if we let go on this one point, okay, then it's just a slippery slope. Okay, so you got it? I mean, that's what we're dealing with here. I mean, if they really wrote our APC into the rules, could we live with it? Well, yeah, we could, you know, okay. But, all right. Interference. Now, you know, you've heard this noise force thing. It comes up all the time. It's been addressed earlier today. Protection of existing modes and users. Okay. Is testing going to help or hinder this? To be blunt, we can run tests until the cows come home, and there are certain people that we're never going to be able to satisfy. Okay. So, you know, so to be, the stuff we're doing in the STA, we're not really trying to do that. Okay, it's just an unanswerable question. But I can say that if you look at the Part 15 company experience, I'm in charge of regulatory affairs for an organization called the Part 15 Coalition, which is 40 of the companies that do, like, all the companies that do the wireless LAN products are members of this organization. And it's been around for 5 years now, and basically we have never had a complaint of one member to another member saying that your products are interfering with my products. Okay? In the U.S. Okay? Overseas, that's a different story. There are places where, you know, like Silence just can't deploy any more units in certain cities because of the interference, and that the governments in those countries have essentially imposed coordination type. You know, they're essentially coordinating unlicensed devices. Okay? So, from that experience, we know that these things can interfere with each other, which is not a big surprise if you just put them in willy-nilly. Okay? But here in the States, like even places where I live, like in the Bay Area, you know, there's a lot of stuff going on 900 megahertz and 2.4, but you can still deploy these things. I have links that are going 20 miles, and they're solid as rock. You know, but that's a matter of the engineering and the fact that this garbage ban isn't as really as garbage as everybody seems to think it is. And that's the real thing here. It's like, you know, whatever happened to science and going out and doing measurements and actually finding out what it's so about something, you know? It's like, what we got at the commission now are lawyers, and so they've been told that it's a garbage ban. I mean, it's right here, you know? It's in print. And so that's what it has to be. And when you come in there and tell them that, hey, well, we ran all these tests and da-da-da-da-da, and we have these links that are going a gazillion miles and, you know, with a pico-watt, you know, they just sit there and they go, but it says right here that it's garbage band. Yeah, okay? And it's so frustrating. Greg and I are going over to the FCC on Wednesday to Office of Plans and Policy to start the, you know, the long battle of pushing this rock up the hill of saying, well, here's what we're doing, and here's who we are, and we're TAPR, and we're you know, nice and cuddly and warm, and, you know, and here's, you know, okay? But you got the deck against you. So it's a sad situation, but, I mean, like was mentioned the other day, last night at the TAPR membership meeting, Susan Ness made a statement in public here last December that she's been told that the amateur radio service really doesn't do experimentation anymore. Yeah. So, what do we do about that? You know, I mean, that's on Real Audio up on the Commissioner's website, and a staffer of hers, well, will remain unnamed, told her this, and this staffer's a ham.
What bugs me is there's a great many hams that say we don't do experimentation. What they're going to use the website, putting things in there every amount of time.
Well, that's what this TAPR SS web pages are being. That's what we've got to build the record, okay? Because again, if this comes up and we have to go to court, we've got to be able to show, oh, you've been experimenting. Well, here it is. Here. Yes, that's right. Verbal doesn't mean a damn. But you got to do that too, because you have to convince them to read the paper. Okay, so enough of the. I've described the current state of affairs, and where we go from here. The SPA is up for renewal on November 8th. We will submit our next report. We will submit our application for an extension. It will probably be extended. I have no doubt about that. And again, we don't expect any action on this docket until, you know, certainly not this year, and who knows about next year. So we'll have another 6 months to do whatever we want, and that's about all I can say right now. So future action. TAPR's been thinking about, and also the league for that matter, that 97 needs to be retooled. Okay, it's too complicated. You know, based where we are in technology, and if we really want to get into this mission of doing experimentation, you know, we want to get the shackles taken off. Okay, so Phil's been advocating for some time, just set some minimal rules, like and minimum, set the max transmit power, set the band limits, you know, limits on spurious emissions, and that's it. Just go rock and roll. Now, could this happen and work in the United States? Well, it seems to work in Japan. Okay. When I was over there in June, this was explained to me at some length about the way they treat rules. Basically, there's a cultural thing where people agree that the rule is bad, then they don't follow it. And even though the rule's on the books, it's not, nobody worries about it. So I had been after them for some time to get their spread spectrum rule, you know, and they kept telling me, and like, I never did anything on paper. And so finally I looked at, when I'm over there, I'm looking them in the eye and I say, give me the rules. I mean, what's the problem? They said, well, we never understood why you wanted the rules because, you know, there are rules, but we don't follow them. We can do whatever we want. And suddenly it became crystal clear. Okay. So one could say for us, why don't we just go out and do what we want? You know, and see what happens. It's better to ask forgiveness than to ask permission. Yeah. Well, I've been told that too.
Don't ask.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. I mean, I've had there's two people that essentially oversee the amateur radio service in the Wireless Specifications Bureau, Johnny Johnson and Ron Cross. You've seen him at the Dayton and whatever. Okay. And I sat down with Johnny one day and he says, look, you know, we don't care what your rules are. I mean, we'll give you whatever you want, you know, if you don't violate some international treaty or something like that. But you've got to agree on it. You know, we're not going to sit there and arbitrate, you know, your border wars. So if you come to us and say, hey, we want this, we'll do it. And I can't think of a clearer statement of their position than that. Okay. Now, whether or not we'll be able to agree on anything like this, I mean, you think we'll be able to agree on a minimal set of rules, just essentially gut 97? Well, there's a proposal right now that's pending at the commission. It hasn't been assigned an RM number yet to do just that. Okay, and you'll get a chance to comment on that. It's around. You see, the league doesn't make a point of putting out for the general community what they file at the commission. And we're trying to work on that. If you look at my badge here, I'm an assistant director of the Pacific Division. And this is really a current hot topic among the directors about this. You know, the feeling is, at least for my director, is that everything that the commission, I mean, the ARRL file should be up on their website so you can see it. You know, what my director's been doing is he gets a copy of it, usually, you know, in paper hard copy, and he gets it scanned in and put in electronic form, and we have the Pacific Division website. And if you go to the Pacific Division website, you can find a lot of the league stuff, and actually comments and reply comments on various issues that have been filed. Okay. Well, I don't understand what you mean. I mean,
we don't put power out of 420 with a man on the campus. So why
I still don't understand what you're talking about. I mean, are you saying basically if you don't operate in the band, it'll be lost? I don't understand that. Well,
the whole 420, 430 band, you don't get to
things have changed. I mean, Ham still have this notion, and it's been continually, I hear it again and again, that if we don't use it, we'll lose it. That's not true anymore. You lose it anyway. Yeah, look at people. Well, hey, it's my job to understand how the commission works, and I'm telling you, that's not operative anymore. Okay? Our high-priced law firm tells us that. Okay? I mean, look, I was at Dayton 2 years ago, and Greg and I were having a discussion with Dave Sumner, and, you know, it was about the spread spectrum thing, and Dave very adamantly said, look, we'll never, you know, lose 2 meters and 70 centimeters. You know, just will never happen. And just 2 weeks later, kaboom. Okay? Now, I tell you, I will never forget that, because I just looked at him and I said, oh, really? You know, and okay, I mean, what could I say at the time? Well, it happened. Okay? So, hey, it's a whole new set of rules. If you haven't been, you know, watching closely what's happened under the Hunt regime at the commission, things have changed, and there's new ideas about spectrum policy. The Congressional Budget Office floated a notion back in April about turning all of the amateur spectrum over to a independent body to manage. Okay, without specifying who that might be. Okay. Oh, and unlicensed. I'm sorry, amateur radio and unlicensed services. Okay. Yes. Okay. Well, remember what I mentioned earlier about Susan Ness saying that amateurs didn't do experimentation? Well, this was in reference to a retooling of Part 5, the experimental service. Now, last December, they put out for comment an NPRM on changing Part 5, and they haven't acted on it yet, and they probably won't act on it this year. They may, I don't know. But it's a major retooling, and basically, under this new Part 5, it looks pretty attractive. It's like, if I want to do something, Part 97, forget it. I'll just go get a Part 5 license. You know? I mean, I fill out a form, I say what I want to do, I pay a filing fee, I get a license, and basically, like, within 60 days. Okay? And you got to do some homework. Yeah, you know. But no content restrictions, you know. Why are we screwing around with Part 97? Okay? So, I mean, that was the commissioners, I mean, that was the way the staff presented it to them. It's like, you know, it had provisions for students and education and, you know, I mean, hey, I mean, the term of these things maxes out at 18 months, but they're renewable. I mean, there's been companies that have gotten these things and had them for 20 years. Okay? So, look, the thing about the commission is they have, you know, if you look at Title 47, you know, there's a lot of rules. And if you have the right kind of talent, legal talent, you can go in there and find something that'll work for you. Okay? So we have a lot of options on it, and I just want you guys to, and I'm going to use a term that's kicked around the commission a lot these days, think outside the box. Okay? So we need to figure out, and so you're right, Bob, retooling 97 is going to start this big Pandora's box thing, and who knows what will happen. And maybe we just say, hey, why not spend the time? Don't spend the time, don't spend the money. Let's just do Part 5. And you can wear your Part 5 call sign on your jacket. Okay? It's a call sign, you know. There's no valid call signs for experimental service. Yeah, you know. So finally, I want to get around to this, what I call the Paul Barron smart radio concept. Okay, because last year, Paul Barron and some industry notables testified in front of the commissioners that was called a Spectrum Open Forum. Okay, so the commissioners were looking for new ideas about how to deal with spectrum and spectrum policy. And Paul got up there and said, look, you know, why not have these frequency agile spread spectrum radios and you know, they dynamically look at where interference is and then jump around it and, you know, and so he's actively at it. George Gilder picked this up, and there was an article in Forbes ASAP here a few months ago. Very well done article, you know, and that got circulated around the commission. So if you go over there now, smart radios is on the radar screen over there. They don't know what to do with it. I mean, they didn't know what to do with it when they were talking about it back last February. Okay, but look, let's face it. You can't go out today, plug down, you know, $100 and buy a smart radio. Okay, I mean, so, and I've asked Paul this. I said, look, you know, hey, this is great stuff, but you know, what are you doing to make this vision happen? And he says, well, hey, life is too short. I don't want to get, yeah, you know, hey, you know, I said, well, will you help us in front of the commission to get the rules changed so we can do smart radios? He says, not on your life. So I just put the notion out, well, why not do this in the amateur radio service first? I mean, we got all this spectrum, still have all this spectrum, so why don't we use it before we lose it? Okay? Well, of course, this takes money and resources and whatever, but I just wanted to float this notion by you that there are other ways to do what we're doing. Also, that there are other regulatory ways of doing what we're doing. And quite frankly, if Part 97 becomes too confining, then maybe we ought to do something else. Okay? Because I can assure you there's nothing blocking us from going out and using the spectrum the way we want. Okay? On a controlled basis. Nationwide. I mean, there's nothing about the experimental service now under these new rules where you can't do something and have a license that covers the whole country. Do experimentation. Okay? Oh, I doubt that would happen because most hands don't know how to read and write. Well, you know, I mean, the license fee is like $80. I don't think it's okay. Yeah. Yeah, it used to be something like $60. I think it went to $80, but it's you know, it's less than $100. What's the big deal? Any questions?
Is there any move outside of the current ISN band to the last part of the have more ISN spectrum or just up to the power non-transmitting beyond only flight emitting, RF emitting light?
The commission this year created a new unlicensed service called the UniBand, Unlicensed National Information Infrastructure Band, which was really a shell game because they essentially, where Part 15 was, they just put this new service in. So where Part 15 has to use spread spectrum, Uni devices don't have to do that. They're narrowband. But they did an interesting thing. They basically said, okay, you guys want a high-speed data service? Okay, so if you're going 20 megabits, okay, you can use this spectral power density. But if you cut your data rate down, then you have to cut your power. And they basically, now they've learned, in these like 17 years they've learned, and they say, we're going to fix it so these devices will only go where we want them to go. So basically, you lower the data rate, like at 20 megabits, they know exactly how far this is going to go, pretty much, okay? And it won't go very far, all right? And if you cut down the data rate to be flick, you got to cut down the power, and you stay within that same envelope. Okay, so that's what they're doing with this new service. So I can assure you that any unlicensed service that comes out of the commission in the future is going to be constrained, and you will not get 20, 60-mile ranges out of it. Okay? Yes?
Why, it seems like the weak signal people in MSAT very narrow bands where they operate. Why can't we come out and publish something with all these rules? This part, we have acres and acres of spectrum, 23 centimeters. Why don't we just agree that we'll just spread the spectrum on these frequencies and we'll create a protected reserve for those bound satellite downlink? We're fine, well, band plans, we're fine.
Yeah.
So what's the issue? Hey, this should have between repeaters. They don't consider band plans to be enough. They want, whether FCC is protected.
Right.
We write a band plan, we present it to the FCC. Every time you want to change it, you got to have the whole thing for it.
Yeah.
We have to follow our own services. I think that's what the FCC wants to do.
Yes.
We've got like AMSAT and ARRL public proposals that are sometimes again TAPR.
Right. Go talk to those. Go up the chain of command in those organizations.
I say agree to approve total best plan for the next hour.
No, I mean it's not that simple. Yeah.
We have to remember that all say AMSAT or ARRL, right? And we just blame it on questions from the but I think this is sensible if you probably talk about it in the future. I'm going to AMSAT because I'm sure that Frankie and myself are going to be correct, but I'm sure I'll have another chance to and Phil, myself, have another chance to talk to mine, but I'll try to write it one first like tonight. Yeah, I mean, it takes a long time. I think you have to walk those folks and educate them. We got years, right? Years.
Yes. Nope. Yep. Slim to none. Yeah. Yeah, that's yeah, that's not a problem.
I got interested in TAPR radio back before there was internet. Still very much in embryonic form. And I thought, yeah, we kind of need to build internet with ham radio. Back ham radio is probably the only way I'm going to be able to do it in the near future because the phone companies are but there's no other alternative. I can't afford phone lines. In the last couple of years, I've changed my mind on this. We now have experiment, going around and burning and keeping and so forth, but what we're supposed to be doing all along.
I agree. I mean, this is a man who now has a cable modem, and I also have a cable. I have a 10 megabit symmetric internet access for $35 a month. And I got to tell you, it's sort of taken the bite off of wireless for me. I mean, it's like, who cares?
I have a shell program which will work all kinds of things.
Yeah? Well, who cares? I'm happy. Look, seriously, I mean, you really, your needs are taken care of, and it's like this global, feeling for man, and it's like...
Even my father has a cable modem, right?
Well, that's fun, and that's building a sense of community. That's my own virtual community. Okay? I mean... Well, that's a very good point. Yeah. Mobility. Yeah, yeah,
DSM has data, DDMA has data, building systems are going digital or carrying data as well as voice.
Right, and there's the next generation, like the 2 megabit stuff that's coming down the pipe for the cellular systems and PCM systems. So,
Where does that leave us? You just take the load off of our doors. You no longer have to talk about it.
Let's face it. In the Commission's view, basically, this experimental thing aside, the our rules have been crafted so that we can't really do anything significant. I mean, as soon as if you look at 97.113, okay, the acceptable use thing, if we do stuff that can be offered by a commercial service, that's not acceptable. And that's fair. And everybody tends to forget about that one little subpart. Okay? And that's the way the Commission looked at it. It's like amateur emergencies, that's all fine. But if we actually had this, nationwide capability, that would be a real problem. Well, that one won't. Yeah.
We all have still
So that will not. The commercial sector is dealing with that, and there are other alternatives like satellites will continue to operate, and they will have the system capacity to deal with outages, serious outages in an area. Yes. Well, but the commercial sector, they've gone well beyond us in terms of, look at IEEE 802.11. If you look at the body of work over the last 10 years from that, I mean, they've done everything you can think of about looking at spread spectrum. Okay?
Well, I think that's a very good point. I mean, there are things that they're not all technical. I mean, some of these are political questions, like can an organization of a bunch of anarchists sort of cooperate in a loose fashion that actually make the technology work? And that is a very interesting question we can answer.
I agree. But what we don't have a tendency to do is to go back and look at what's on the record, okay, and not go and just do the same stuff all over again.
We definitely need methods of managing spectrum that are less centralized, and that's the trend.
Yeah.
Spread spectrum is one of those technologies that allows it to happen, but it still requires some local coordination. The question is not whether or not to work politically.
But there's some of the technology that you want to do that there's always lots of stuff out there that hasn't been done
Any other questions?
Second aspect is on the frequency portion, where the instrument has band plans for the ARRL to report back to the ARRL.
They don't believe it will work. They don't believe band plans will work, and that's not a good long-term solution, even though they just filed to do it.
So we would like to express back to the users how they register so others know who they can call to.
That remains to be worked out. As we proceed on this, we'll have to work out a scheme to handle that. And some schemes, if you look at what's on the docket on this issue, some things have been proposed. Yeah.
Probably out more. I don't know. Why don't you just get that part of it done?
Well, do what? I mean,
Complete for every band, we got one center frequency for the IP, one bandwidth where you could have more concentrated kilobytes, and then everything else from there would have to kind of local issue.
yeah, those should be local issues.
The whole idea is the whole spectrum management has to be central.
Yes.
Satellite to get you to uplink.
We're talking primarily about local interference.
No, I don't believe that.
You're right. They're local.
Well, I mean, there's different views. Like, well, okay. Any other questions? We go. We need to close the session, I think, and then we can talk about this afterwards.
Did we establish a certain restaurant?
Restaurant?
Where
I don't know. I have no idea at this point. Thank you. It was a great DCC. Watts, either 70 or 100. Okay. And but you know, it was still okay. I mean, it was different. Then a year passed, and we get to the report and order phase, and then in '85, report and orders came out on both dockets, and we got 97.311 as we know it today. Okay. And if you look at the discussion in the report and order, it's very interesting. It's like a lot of the stuff that we hear today, noise floor, interference, was all treated. I mean, that report and order, if you look at the NP, well, I'm sort of getting ahead of myself. But if you look at that, read that report and order, and the NPRM from the previous year, there was a lot of thought in the commission that went into writing that. It took a long time to write, and it was really well done, and it really was a very good treatment of the issues and the comments that were filed on that docket. So, again, we got 97.311 as we know it, and on the Part 15 side, we got what we know today. Of course, it's been changed more so than the amateur rules. But Part 15 was cut down to 1 watt and 3 bands. Okay. So, again, there was a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff where this initial brand concept from '81 was whittled down to some pale shadow of itself, where when the idea was split spectrum taking over the world, well, now it was just sort of taking over a corner in eastern Kuwait. So the 85 rules that we all know and love, SS above 2420, we all know what these are, okay? And again, just ask the question, why were we treated so shabbily when Part 15 wasn't? Well, and because all these things moved along at the same time. Now, I have actually gone and interviewed people at the commission, because I'm in the process of writing a monograph on this. Unfortunately, a lot of the stuff I've been told is off the record. And so, unfortunately, I cannot tell you this grand sweep. You can see the horses charging off in the distance and, the drum roll and whatever, CinemaScope, Technicolor. And you see the hook planet, and these people get engaged, and like the time passes and the 30 minutes are over, and they're still sitting there on the edge of their chairs, okay? And that's how you influence people at the FCC, okay? I remember one talk I gave to a staffer. I did just that, and I heard about this from other people for weeks, because this guy just went around and told everybody about this great talk, that just talked about the history of spread spectrum from day one. Okay. Now, I'm saying this because there's a method to my madness in telling you all this, because, you see, I want you guys to become part of the process. You see, I don't want to be the one that does all this. I want you to help. Okay. So to do that, you need to know how things work. So the Part 15 rules, you guys know and love these too. We didn't get hybrid, they did. We got more power. They got unlimited spreading codes. So the commercial sector was actually able to go out and build real products. So from the 85 period, what you see is amateur radio, like the AMRAP people got burnt out and just went off and, did something else. And the commercial sector, a few companies came out, sort of stubbed their toes, But here we are today where we have millions of these devices out in the field. About 95% of the devices in the market are LAN-oriented products, local area networks, and about 5% are MAN products. Okay. Now, to be perfectly frank, after all the skullduggery behind the scenes, the commission was basically convinced that, by putting this service in the garbage band, what they is commonly known as the garbage band, because this is where the industrial, scientific, and medical stuff was, like kiln dry, So they threw this out, and actually, in terms of what happened in public, there wasn't a lot of comment about it. If you look at the docket and see what comments were filed, there wasn't a lot of stuff filed in this, but behind the scenes, there was a lot of activity. So what it did kick up is that some of these people at the commission talked to people at AMRAD, Paul Ronaldo and others, and a lot of things started happening in terms of doing spread spectrum. I mean, AMRAD took this thing to heart and said, hey, this is neat. Let's go out and see what we can do with it. Okay, let's take it for a walk. I won't cover any of that stuff because it's been documented in the ARRL source book, and we would like to certainly see them continue to sell more of those source books at $12 a pop. So basically nothing happened on the FCC front until '84, when notice for full rulemaking came out both for the amateur service and for unlicensed. In the spread spectrum source book, you will see all the documents on the FCC side, okay, for the amateur radio service. And what is, of course, harder to get a hold of is what happened on the unlicensed side. I have all the filings and stuff from back then in terms of what was put on the record in the actual NTRM. And I think I'll put that up on the site too. It's, again, you can't get these things in machine-readable form, so you really got to just, do it the hard way. But if you look at the amateur radio NPRM, it's very restrictive in terms of what was proposed. And if you look at the Part 15 NPRM, it's like wide open in comparison, relatively. Okay. However, if you look at that 84 NPRM and go back to the notice of inquiry in 81, it was like, well, what happened? I mean, it's like they were proposing to use spread spectrum from like 70 megahertz up to light, and with no power limits, okay? And now all of a sudden they had, clipped that down a bit in terms of where you could use it, and also the power is, I think, down to like, hear ye, 20 hertz, WA, DGT. All right, if we're lucky, we can get through this in a half hour. This is the unfun stuff, part of this stuff. It's not technical, it's rules, it's the government, Big Brother, whatever. And however, it's my lot in life to have to deal with these issues. So, and actually, it can be fun sometimes. What we're going to do here, I've sort of given this talk for the last this is the third year in terms of going over the regulatory stuff. So some of you may have heard some of this before, so please bear with me. Again, some of you probably haven't. So I want to go over the path of SF regulation in the United States, talk about some of the current regulatory activities, because actually there's been a lot of action since I did this last year, and talk about some future things that need to be done on the regulatory front. So the FCC started getting interested in spread spectrum in 1981 when they issued a notice of inquiry, which was the first toe in the water for them on this issue. I guess a lot of stuff got declassified back in '79. I was just talking to somebody the other day who could file a patent in 52 and it went and embargoed and didn't pop out until 79. So, like, from what I've seen in the literature, basically things started popping after that. And then there's some people that went to work for the commission from the private sector that wanted to really do something different, and then they essentially forced this NOI out the door in 81. And I think what I'm going to do next year, or at least I'm going to try to put this NOI up on the TAPR website, add to our SF historical page, because it is really an interesting piece of work in terms of what it proposed. You know, it's like, hey, we think spread spectrum is the best thing in the world. It will solve all the world's problems. Certainly the commission's problems in terms of treating spectrum like property and not being able to refarm it because it's like, you know, Ben Cartwright and his boys, you know, really walk onto the pond of Rosa and will shoot anybody who comes on their land stuff. But all I will say is that it is a very fascinating tale of power brokering behind the scenes. Okay, fear, control, lots of things. Okay. And actually, for instance, there was a lot more stuff that was done under the AMRAD umbrella that was actually documented. In fact, you know, head shaking here. Okay? So there was the suppression of things. Okay. So maybe one day all of this will come out. Okay. So I'm essentially sitting on this monograph where I have these interviews of like people like Mike Marcus and others, and I can't do anything with it. Okay. So all I can do is take what was put on the public record, and I'll put that on the website eventually, but I can't put the detailed story about how we got to where we got. Because you see, it's important because when I go to the commission now and I talk to them, you see, they're basically lawyers there. And lawyers, of course, like to work with precedent. Okay? So you say, well, why don't you go back and look at that NOI in 81? And they give you this blank stare, and it's like, you mean I have to work? You know, I have to go back and find this thing? You know, and they say, oh, no, yes, here it is. Okay. And then, you know, you get them to read it, and they say, this was from the commission? Okay, I mean, wow. So, and then you walk them through the regulatory history on paper and how things change. Okay. And I found that when you go into the commission, it's like, what they're used to is people coming in and saying, I want this. Give me this. Okay? And they got this little, you know, you can get a meeting with anybody at the commission pretty much for a half hour just by making an appointment. So they sit there and they got this, you know, the chronometer running, you know, and you rabble on and rant and whatever. And they say, thank you very much. Thank you for coming in, and adios. Okay? Okay? And what I do when I go in is I basically play history lesson, you know, and just do this